and welcome to episode 77 of the Alfa Romeo Driver Podcast, brought to you by the Alfa Romeo Owners Club. I'm Guy Swarbrick, and with me for the first of our profiles of AROC families, I have Jack and Rosie Hodson. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Normally we start this by talking about the person that we're interviewing's first Alfa, their first experience of the brand. But I think you guys go back a little bit further than your own introduction to Alfa. So tell me a little bit about the family history.
Our exposure to Alfa goes back before we were both born. Our dad bought a Duetto back in 1975. So it's a 1969 model. As far as I know, it wasn't in a good state. He paid £1,000 for it back then in 75. But the stories that he's told me is that the brakes were failing, rust was everywhere. And yeah, it took a minor restoration to get it back on the road.
So what kind of state was it in when you first came to know it?
So I think I'd seen it about 2 resprays later and probably several major mechanical overhauls of various parts. Dotted around the garage, you can find spare axles, sumps, engine heads. Yeah, there's various parts that he's taken on over the years and swapped over just to keep it running. For him, it was very much a driver's car. It was not there to be a pristine showcase. It's basically a car that he wanted to drive in good working order, but not pristine. That wasn't his thing.
And can you remember the first time you went out in it, both of you?
I probably was a baby. I mean, maybe not a baby because the back seats weren't exactly
it's more
ideal.
Shelford seats, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess you can't really call it.
I wouldn't be surprised if we did all go out in it to the coast or something when I was very young.
I was going to say, you often have family memories of going out in the family Alfa, but it's a bit trickier in the Spider.
The only actual memory I can recall being quite young is I was in the passenger seat, Dad was driving, and Mum was squished between the boot and the back of the seats as we went to Bromley Pageant one day. So that's a huge car show down here in Bromley, and it's that's my first genuine memory of the car, of going out in it. But there's possibly we did go out a bit younger than I was then. But yeah, I can't quite recall.
And was that the only Alfa in the family?
Well, growing up, we actually grew up with Golf GTIs, and they went from a Mark 1 to a Mark 2 in fairly quick succession. And then came the Alfas in the form of a 164. That was a 164 12 valve. That turned into a 164 Cloverleaf, and then came the 164 Super. When we were done with 164s, came the 166. And finally, Mum now has the Giulia.
Right.
So, it's always been the 4-door saloons that they've kept going over the years.
I think you probably missed about 20, 30 cars in between.
Yeah, there are others. And that's, I guess, in our lifetime. But if you go back a bit further, Dad had a Sud.
Couple, I think.
He had a Giulia. Yeah. He had the Giulia, which was brought back from Milan. They flew over and drove that back. They ran out of fuel twice, as far as I can remember. Once in the
in the Giulia, not the aeroplane on the way over.
Yeah. One of those running out of fuels was in the middle of the night. I think we were carted off to our grandparents for the weekend whilst all this went on. And then, there were there's various 156s, I think.
Yeah.
One of those was yours, Rosie, I think.
Eventually, yeah. That would lead on to my first Alfa anyway. I can go into that if you want.
We'll come back to that. Yeah. And anything else we've missed?
The reason that Dad got into Alfas in the first place is because he'd seen a Duetto in the film The Graduate. I believe that was his influence into it, and then it just sparked a lifelong love, didn't it?
Which is a fantastic and slightly cringeworthy film if you watch it now.
I think I've seen the Simpsons version of it.
Yeah, I think that's remarkably faithful from what I remember. Okay, so that was the cars. Was there a club involvement at the time? Were you dragged around to National Alfa Days and events all over the country as well?
Yeah, I think we went to most National Alfa Days, all the major events, I'd say. And we spent a lot of time at Brands Hatch watching various series there. One of which was the touring cars. Could have been the season finale. And I just remember Simone being punted off in the 155 and the crowd going crazy about it.
I was there on South Bank watching that day.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I remember that quite well. And that was the mid-90s. Then, National Alpha Day was very much a visit we do every year. And also there were trips to Brooklands, Goodwood occasionally. Yeah, I can't think of too many others, but we're usually at things like Bromley Pageant. Obviously, that's on our doorstep as one of the major events. And then obviously all the other smaller events that are run within the section of Kent and East Sussex. So we were involved in a number of those over the years.
We talked about the fact that family trips in a Spider are more problematic, but you had lots of other Alphas. Any good stories of family outings in Alphas over the years?
There's one that springs to mind. I'm not sure if I was with my dad at the time, but I don't actually know how it was sustained, but the Duetto got a dent in it. I don't know if you remember, Jack.
I think I was the one that put it there.
Yeah, it may well have been you. Now it's coming back to me. I don't know if you want to tell that side of the story.
Yeah, so I think we're on a section organised tulip rally. So, we had a navigator. Would have been in the other half, and we're driving through the Kent countryside, trying not to miss our turning point. Of course, the tulip rally is done on mileage, and you got to incorporate this with an Alfa tachometer. So it wasn't easy, especially in one that was designed in 1969. So we're trying to find our turning points, but we went through what I can only describe as a tree tunnel, and it was a bright summer's day, but it was really dark where the trees had blocked out all the light. Coming the other way was a bridal school, and we slowed down to an absolute crawl and eventually stopped to let the horses pass. One of the horses did get a bit spooked and started veering sideways into the car. So it didn't seem like a big drama at the time. So we got out of the car, we had a look, couldn't see anything for the life of me, couldn't see anything wrong. And we just, they gave their apologies and we went on our way. And that was that. We turn up at the finishing point, which is a pub in the middle of Kent. Get out of the car, just take a quick look back at it as you do. And there's a whacking great dent in the door. It was huge. To this day, I just cannot imagine how I didn't see it. Yeah, it troubles me as to how this dent got there. Obviously, it's from a horse's backside, but there it was, gleaming in the sunlight. To my surprise, Dad wasn't too bothered about this.
Yeah, maybe he had always wanted to do what he did to get the dent out.
Yeah, well, you tell the story of how the dent was removed.
So I don't know if maybe he was at a section meet or something, but he somehow got hold of a plunger. Don't know where that came from. And
somebody just brought it with them to the section meet.
Yeah, you never know when you need one. And I don't think it really took too much, but he just went at the dent with the plunger and it popped back out, and it was all like nothing had ever happened.
Yeah, it was incredible. These doors are made of thicker steel than they are these days.
Yeah.
Somehow
and they're not a simple shape either, are they?
No, not at all.
Like it's a flat door.
Yeah, and it came out. I think it had a few little blemishes here and there, but it was essentially 90% fixed and no loss of paint.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Any other things you can remember?
There's one more that springs to mind, but I don't think I can retell it. I don't know if you remember, Jack, when Mum and Dad were coming back from Europe, they were coming through Calais, and I believe the car was stripped down to its as much as you can. I don't know if they were going to try and take the car or something. Dad was begging them not to, and they said, okay, fine. And they just, do you remember?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, this is probably back in the 70s, 80s, but they came back from Europe, and I'm not entirely sure, without having a good close look at the Spider, at how the sort of sections in the boot are made up, but it appeared to the police that there was a box welded into the wheel arch. And they may have assumed that this box was filled up with stuff that shouldn't be there. And they wanted to cut holes in it to find out what was inside the chassis or the body of the car. Dad had to probably just plead with them not to go any further. And eventually he got away with it. And, didn't get away with it. There was nothing done wrong, but was allowed to go on his way.
That's your story. And
I'll stick to it. But that was...
half our listeners are going, no, there's a box in the boot.
Yeah, I'd love to see what he means by that, and I might have to go and explore the car. The car, by the way, it lives on with my mum. It's under her care in a very much watertight garage at her house. She had it sort of checked over and some suspension and electrics work done a couple of years ago. And every now and again, we take it out for a little drive just to check it starts and runs nicely and stop anything seizing up too much. But yeah, it's in good health.
I don't think I'm strong enough to drive it, but I enjoy sitting in the passenger seat.
Yeah, I drove one for the first. I'd never driven a 105 until the Goodwood Revival before last. And one of our members, Chris Whelan, very kindly loaned me his Duetto for the weekend. It's hard work.
Yeah, the steering's pretty heavy.
It is.
And there's a little technique to getting it off the line. And
I remember having Dad asking me to hold the reverse in place while he reversed, and maybe even you did, Jack, as well.
Yeah, well, that's never been fixed. That's now a feature.
It's a feature, yeah.
In April 2020, we organised the Doug Hodson Memorial Drive. It happened to be on Drive It Day, and we organised the Tulip Rally down into Kent, and just finished with a lunch, historic gardens. I can't remember which one. I think it could have been Hull Park. So we all ventured down to meet at Headcorn Aerodrome, where I handed out the maps. The map was kindly provided by longtime member Fred Baker, and it was a route that he'd done with his motorcycle club some years ago, and you could really tell it was done by a motorcycle club, given the narrowness of some of the lanes. But anyway, we did it. We all made it. We got to Hull Park. We had lunch, and everyone had a really good time. And there's fond memories of that day. In particular, on the way back, we were doing fine until we got to the part of the M20 where it intersects the M25, and the Spider decided it had enough for the day. So it was popping, banging, sparking, and eventually just sort of ground to a halt, and we had to just do our best to pull over on a pretty busy section of motorway. We called the recovery service. They sent a truck, but in the meantime, a member of the club of our section from the other side of the motorway spotted us and decided that he would be able to lend us a hand. So he came off at the next exit for him, turned around, double backed on himself, and his name was Simon. Really grateful to him for his help and trying to get the car going again. He has an S2 Spider, and he knew his way around the engine, but unfortunately the coil had gone, so there's no hope of fixing that at the roadside. But I just thought I'd mention this because he was a very kind member, and it's nice for him to stop and lend a hand. It was this event that prompted my mum to do something more with the Spider and get it sorted for a more long-term storage plan. But she put it into Auto Britalia, and they first of all dealt with the electrics and installed the 1-2-3 ignition system, as well as overhauling the suspension, as I mentioned. But the car is in much better health now, but it was just a funny way to end Dad's memorial drive that day.
So just to pick up on Rosie's first car, I guess the thing about that kind of passion within a family is the next generation either just is so ingrained with it, they go with it, or rebels and does completely the opposite. I know I'm from a family of Manchester City supporters, so I'm a City supporter. My brother supports Tottenham because he wasn't quite rebellious enough to support United, but there was no way he was going to support the same team that his dad did. So you went that route. Tell us about your first Alfa.
Yeah, I can go first. It's a bit shorter than Jet's, I think. So my first ever car, I've only had 3 cars. So my first was a VW Polo, very faithful, very good for a run around. But eventually my head was turned by the fact that we were swapping cars, I think, within the family. I think Jack was wanting to get rid of his 156 Sport Wagon, which we nicknamed Bluey because it was blue. And Dad had Reddy. And I didn't like driving Bluey after having tried a couple of times. I don't know why, didn't like it. So we agreed that he'd take Bluey. So my dad would take Bluey and I would take Reddy. And I had that, I wouldn't say too long because the brakes failed on it while I was driving. So that was, it was just like a classic Alfa experience, I suppose. Luckily, I got home safely. And then after that, my parents were like, you must get something much more reliable, something that we're not going to worry about you in. So I am now the proud owner of a Mito that I've had since 2018. It's still going very strong. I've had it since new, so it is really lovely. Yeah, I don't think I'd look any other way now. And I kind of knew that. I knew that from when I started driving, I would eventually end up with an Alfa. And yeah.
We'll come back to the racing later on, but at least that 156 would have prepared you for driving the current 155 V60i, having no brakes.
True.
So Jack, your car history is a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, it's not drastically long, but it's a few more, I guess. So at what would probably be Spring Alpha Day at Duxford, I think in 2003. I'd recently passed my test. I'd had a Peugeot 106, a Golf Mark III, and I was ready to move into the Alfa world. I guess I was at 18 at this stage, and we saw a 155 at Duxford. Sorry, it wasn't Duxford. It was at Chatham Dockyard, where we're returning to later this year. So we saw a 155, and Dad said, well, that would be a fantastic first Alfa for you. And I thought, well, it's pretty big. It's doesn't naturally seem a kind of a younger person's car to me, but well, by then I was looking on Auto Trader when we got home, and yeah, there were a few for sale. I obviously had to get the insurance quotes back then, and discovered that the insurance would actually cost more than the car, which it's part of the course. It was just a factor you had to accept, really. So yeah, about a few weeks later, I think we went to Swindon and we found a 155 Super, so a 2-litre twin spark, and drove that home. And yeah, that was my first Alfa, and I was a really proud owner of that car. I loved it. It was absolutely fantastic. But a year later, another 155 appeared on one of the Alfa message boards, and this was my first project Alfa. It was a 155 Q4. Going very cheap. Yes. Going very cheap, and it was in need of quite a lot of work. We had to sort of embark on a mission of getting this thing recommissioned. I didn't even go and see it. I just sent the money and a trailer. And it turned up about a week later. On the way down, a wheel fell off. It was on an A-frame. I'm not sure quite how that happened. But anyway, it made it. And it sat on the driveway for a number of weeks. The previous owner was moving to New Zealand with a new job, and it just had to go. So I took it on and started doing it up. And the main job basically was to put all the top half of the engine back on. Luckily, he had got as far as, the head gasket had gone, hence the project that was on. So he'd replaced the head gasket and he'd bolted the head back on, and that's where it stopped. So that's where I took over, and all the parts I needed were in the boot. And over a course of I think it must have been a couple of months, we put it back together, got it MOT'd, and that's the car I still have today. And that was back in 2004. And
that's quite a project to take on, because the Integrale underpinnings are not mechanically the simplest setup in the world, and not a huge amount of space around them.
I did consult the manual several hundred times to do this job, but it did come together quite well. Things started making sense as we got through the box of parts. It wouldn't run initially, wouldn't run very well, and we had to take it to a specialist in South London that would basically check over the electrics, make sure I put all the plugs in the right place, and replace the phase sensor, and eventually it fired into life. And that's when, I started driving it. And its first major outing was to National Alpha Day that year, 2000, would have been 2005 by now, I think. So that was quite a big journey to do, very shortly after getting it going. The next major drive in that car was to the Nürburgring a month later. This one didn't go so well. I returned, but the car didn't. Basically, where I had routed the power steering pipes to the cooler, they had been rubbing on the exhaust manifold. Where the exhaust manifold got so hot on the Nürburgring, it burned through them and started dumping a lot of fluid everywhere. And I think this is really before the Nürburgring was as popular as it is today. And I was lucky enough to get away with not paying any hefty cleanup fines. Luckily, I had international breakdown insurance, and they covered me to go out there and get it again a couple of weeks later.
And obviously, it had broken down somewhere other than on the Nürburgring.
Yes, of course. Dead right,
just outside in that vague area, but not actually on the track.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Public car park. And so the German dealership did a good job of putting it back together and putting some new pipes in for me for the princely sum of £160, if I remember correctly. It was dead cheap, not what I was expecting. And we drove it home. It was a second little Nürburgring trip.
Any Nürburgring trips in the Mite, Rosie?
No, not yet.
I'd recommend it though.
I think you could. We'll come back to the racing later. But so that was the 155, which I think is a pretty rare car. Or was a pretty rare car when you got it in 2005. Very rare now.
Yeah, so my neighbour, fellow car enthusiast, happened to be on howmanyleft.com and had a quick search and discovered there are 0 registered with tax. There's a few off the road, probably about 10 or so, maybe more. But very, very few. Yeah, and I say none running at the moment, including mine.
Why is yours not running at the moment?
lack of MOT and a fuel leak. And time.
And I guess one of the problems, and it brings me on to the next thing I was going to talk to you about, one of the problems with cars of that period now is that there are lots of parts that you can't get. And I think you've come up with a fairly unusual way of solving that problem.
Yeah, so I embarked on 3D printing and then discovered that you can print extremely strong material and also flexible material. So in the past year or so, I've been printing new rubber bushes for the gearbox supports, made out of really firm material, but it does give, and it's not going to snap on us or disintegrate. So that's been a kind of lifeline to these engines, these cars, because these parts are just not available. So we've got a gearbox support, we've got an exhaust mount, but also what really got me started in 3D printing was Alfa 155 wing mirrors. They are in extreme short supply. And if you can get hold of one, it'll probably be the wrong color to match your car and could have been through its own sort of issues. A mirror for that car is sort of fundamental to its look. And you can put on a Fiat Tipo mirror if you so wish to do so, but it'll just look awful.
It fits, but that's about as much as you can say for it.
That's all you'd really want, yeah. So I've had some parts that I happen to have 3D scanned, and now I can 3D print those and refurbish 155 wing mirrors, which has been pretty popular. People do seem to be in need of these parts, or at least some sort of service to make theirs functional again. I broke my own mirror a couple of years ago just by standing up from underneath it, bumping into it, and they're so brittle, it just snapped off. It's just, one knock and they're gone. So we needed to do something about it.
So that one's not running at the moment. Any other Alfas in the collection that actually get you anywhere at the moment?
I've got three, but one runs. That's a Giulietta. The Giulietta is my daily. It's a 170 horsepower Speciale. I absolutely love it. I think it's a fantastic car. I know you're fond of the Giulietta too.
I am.
But it really does tick all the boxes. It's been reliable, touch wood, and it's just fun to drive. I'm really impressed with it. The other car in the stable is a 2001 GTV, the V6 model. It wasn't a million bits. It's just gone down to 1,000 bits now. It's slowly coming back together.
You haven't lost 990,000 bits. You just put some of them together into bigger bits.
Yes.
Yeah, Giulietta, that 170 is nice, and it has the huge advantage that it doesn't have the self-destructing fuel injectors that the 1750 has, as I know from personal experience.
No, it's been excellent. It needs to be a reliable daily car, and that's exactly what it is. But it also puts a smile on your face when you drive it.
So I know, Rosie, that Jack is still quite heavily involved in the Kent and East Sussex section, as your dad was. Yeah, so you're no longer there. Are you involved in your new local section?
I'm actually not. I've kept my toe in the Kent and East Sussex. My mum still lives in Kent, and so does Jack. So it's a great excuse to come down and go to events. Yeah, I've always enjoyed going to them and getting involved, having chats with people that you see only at the events, but it's always lovely to catch up.
And any involvement in the new Alfa female section?
Some, yeah. I'd perhaps like to do a little bit more. Currently in the midst of planning a wedding, though, so quite busy with that.
That can be fitted into other more important things, like club activity.
True. No, I'd like to get involved. Yeah.
And indeed the racing. So we got there eventually. I always have to try hard not to make all of these podcasts about the virtual racing, because I probably would do if I could get away with it. How did you get involved in that? I know you're both involved. We'll talk to Jack again in a minute, but how did you get roped into sim racing?
So I had explored it maybe 6 months prior to actually getting involved. I think I joined the group and I was sort of looking and I was like, I'm not sure, whether it was for me at the time. And then we went to, I think it's National Alpha Day, the one that was at Bicester, and you had the truck set up. So Jack and I were both there. I had a go on the sim. I thought, I've grown up playing games, video games, racing games in particular, all my life. So it fits very well. I enjoyed what I did in that truck. And then I think Jack and I just talked each other into it. We're like, if you do it, I'll do it, kind of thing. And I originally started using an Xbox controller. So I was an amateur with a controller, so it's like disadvantage even more. But it did help to get to grips with the sometimes complicated setups and things like that. Yeah, and I've stuck with it. I think I'll move on to that because everyone's really friendly, really helpful. It takes a bit of time to get your head around it, but it's really fun, and it's a commitment that I do enjoy to keep up and practice with Jack sometimes and with others. It's been fun.
There's some good close racing. You noticed earlier on we're currently apparently tied on points after drop scores in one of the championships. But you've had some very close races with your brother, haven't you?
Yes, you may have noticed. I mean, your listeners won't know that I'm wearing this top that Jack bought me as a sorry for knocking me off the track a few times, which he didn't need to do.
I received a generous gift for the class win last year. And I couldn't spend it on myself, knowing that I'd knocked Rosie off the track at least twice, being my fault.
Very generous.
And I was pretty gutted about that. So that was my gift.
And of course, we separated you, well, mostly, apart from when the two packs come together. When you got promoted into the pros, Jack, she's not far behind you though. I think there's a good chance she'll be racing with you again, if not in the next season, then certainly sometime soon.
Yeah, no, Rosie is a force to be reckoned with. And I immensely enjoy the virtual racing. It's been a real steep learning curve. There's a lot more to it than just turning up and racing. There's you have to practice. You've got to put in a bit of time. Yeah, get your settings right. And it's not unachievable. It's something you can learn to do. And obviously we did learn to do it on the go. But the community around it is fantastic. Like Rosie said, everyone's very friendly, they're supportive. And if you're stuck, they will find a way for you. And I think we've really both enjoyed it. And and it has resulted in some really close races.
And any favourite tracks and cars from the two of you from the last 2 years nearly?
Wow, yeah, it's been 2 years. I definitely enjoyed racing with the Giulietta. That was a very good, stable car to use.
I think the Giulietta might be back at some point.
Oh, that'd be good. I know we rotated through a few in one season. I remember favouring some of those more than others. I think the older, was it 105? Yeah. That was very tricky to use. It reminds me a lot of the 155 we're using at the moment.
Yes, although I think the brakes are even worse on the 105 GTA than they are on the 155.
Yeah, you've really got to plan your braking zone.
I think the 156 was a really good model to use as well.
The Extreme.
Yeah.
I think a few people felt that was a little bit too easy to drive, but it was good fun because it was so quick.
Well, I liked it.
I think the Juliet has been the most forgiving and able to sort of rock up at any track and just do a bit of practice, but not a lot to get on board with it. I'm loving the RSS. I guess is it the equivalent of the Formula One car? I'm not really sure, but
yeah, I think it's more Formula 2-ish than Formula One. They do a faster, almost exact replica of an F1 car, which is even more of a beast. But
it appears to do about 180 miles an hour, and it feels like it's on rails in some corners. The trouble is, you go from 1 week of the RSS back into the 155, and it's a completely different experience. Even at the same track, you've got to relearn entirely.
Well, it's almost worse at the same track, isn't it? Because you know where all your braking points are, and then you get in the 155, and they're not there
probably
anymore.
Double it in a bit.
You need to brake a week earlier than you've been doing in the RSS. So you haven't done a single-seater series, have you, Rosie?
I haven't. I couldn't commit to racing every week, but it does look a lot of fun. I can't imagine the grip. Having used the 155, it must be very different.
Yeah, we were talking, I don't know if you've practiced at Jeddah yet, but Jack and I were talking earlier about being able to go through some of the corners flat or close to flat, which just wouldn't be, you wouldn't even imagine being able to do that in the 155 because you'd be completely sideways.
No.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about that's enough. If I talk any more about virtual racing, we'll lose all of our listeners. We've talked about the cars you have owned, and obviously you've been exposed to pretty much everything Alfa have made in all your years of going to National Alfa Day, and at least driven the virtual versions of many of them. So I guess two questions to you both. What would you like to have next? And money, no object, what would you like to have?
I think for me, the natural progression would probably be a Giulietta if I'm feeling ambitious. The Giulia, they do look lovely. I know our mum absolutely loves hers.
She not let you borrow hers yet?
No, I've driven it around the driveway. It's a beautiful car, but perhaps a little too big for what I need at the moment. For the car that I'd like to own, I've just slipped my mind. So I'll just quickly research if you want to go, Jack.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll go to Jack and then we'll come back.
So I guess the next Alfa I'd like to own would probably be a Giulia QV. That would be the dream as well. But I'm realistically, what I love about Giulia is I did borrow it once from my mum, drove it to the Lake District and around the Lake District for a few days and absolutely fell in love with it. It's such a smooth ride and it's very well balanced. and easy to drive as well. So that really made me fall in love with Giulias in general. So yeah, that could be the progression on from the Giulietta. Although you do lose a little bit of the sort of practicality of the hatchback of a Giulietta, but that's something you have to accept, I guess. A dream Alfa. That's a tough one. That is a tough one. Naturally, I'd probably say the Giulia GTAM. That's a fairly common pipe dream, I think, in the Alfa world. But if we were to go a little bit older, I think it's hard not to love a car like the 8C. It's just fantastically beautiful. It's a car that sounds as good as it looks. And goes pretty well too. I think that would be the real dream.
So your current Alfa's a Lancia, and the Alfa that you like's a Maserati.
Maserati, yes.
Good to know. I have to say, the thing about the Giulia, that people kind of talk about it, but I think they underestimate just how much of a difference it makes. It's just how good the chassis is. So I'm lucky enough to have driven the Giulia GTAM, and I've driven Quadrifolios and Veloces. But the first Giulia I drove, which I had for a couple of days as a press car, was a diesel Speciale. And the first couple of days driving around towns and driving on motorways, I was kind of thinking, I'm not really sure what the fuss is about. It perfectly competent, nice place to sit, all the things you would normally like about an Alfa, but it's just a bit. And then every 2 months, I have to drive from Berkshire to Suffolk to Lavenham, where the magazine's printed, to sign off the magazine. And the last half an hour or so is all tight, twisty country lanes. And all of a sudden, the fact that it had a not particularly powerful diesel engine didn't matter anymore, because the kind of chassis came alive, and it was just absolutely brilliant fun, because it just did what you wanted it to do.
I found the base engine, the 200 horsepower, was actually more than enough to enjoy a drive to the Lake District and back. It was absolutely sufficient. Yes, it is nice to have more power now and again, but it doesn't always need to be on tap like that.
Rosie, how are you getting on with Google?
Yeah, Google has answered my question. This will probably surprise Jack as a dream Alfa for me, but I just think this model is just beautiful. I've seen it at National Alpha Days and wherever else. It's the Montreal. I just think it's so lovely looking in blue. I think it's beautiful, yeah.
I'm a bit of an engineering geek, and the first thing that I noticed on a Montreal that got me really excited was the NACA duct on the bonnet, the air intake. And I just looked at it and I thought, it's a car with a NACA duct on. It's awesome. But it's just, fantastic car.
Just remember, they have a relatively complicated injection system, which can sort of rear its ugly head every now and again. But I think there's a few experts now around the world that can sort of keep on top of that and, service them.
I think there are some electrical problems as well. I think somebody once said to me of his Montreal, I've upgraded the electrical system now to the point where it works. But yeah, I mean, you don't need to drive it, do you? You can just stand there and look at it all day.
Absolutely
gorgeous. Okay, so that's future car aspirations. Any plans for the rest of the year in terms of places you want to go in the car rather than honeymoons, unless you're going on the honeymoon in your Mito? Any events you're looking forward to the rest of the year?
Well, I'd love to take the Mito to America for the honeymoon, but don't think that would be
might be the only one there.
Would be complicated, wouldn't it? Yeah.
For me, I can't really currently see beyond the wedding, so I don't have any events planned yet, but I'm sure there'll be lots coming about. I know that the section we're in is very busy, very active, so there's always something to come back for.
When is the big day? Whisper it. We'll avoid gate crashes, but
the 9th of April.
Easter Sunday.
Very soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So actually, if you only go to America for a week, you could be back in time for Spring Alpha Day.
Oh, that's very true. But we're going for 2.
Okay, fair enough. But National Alpha.
I have got a plan, though, just an aside, at the wedding, just to incorporate the love, the passion that we all have for Alphas within our family. I'd like to line up Jack's car, my car, Mum's car, all next to each other with the ribbons and get some lovely photos in front of that.
It sounds like I've got to go and wash the car.
It sounds like I need to as well. Yeah.
So is there a conversion job to be done here on the other half?
Oh, he can't drive, but he has, by osmosis, as I say, now has a strong appreciation for Alphas as well. He always points them out to me when we're driving around. So yeah.
Fantastic. as it should be. Jack?
For events this year, yes. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to going back to Duxford. It's been a number of years since the club went there, I think. And the last time was just a beautiful spring day. So, yeah, really looking forward to that one. And then there's a new event at Brands Hatch this year, the Super Tourers. And obviously the 155 will fit in very nicely there. So really looking forward to get it back on the road. That's my target date.
I was going to say, so it's your target date.
Yeah. Well, I got target date of Spring Alpha Day for the GTV and the Super Tourers in July for the 155. And and we'll see what we take to Chatham Dockyard for the Southern Alpha Day in September. But they're the three main events I'll be going to this year. There is some thought of a sort of North European drive in the Giulietta just for a summer holiday, but that's very early planning stages as yet. But I would love to do that.
Can't make that line up with the Dutch club event in...
Oh, Spectacular Sportivo.
Yeah.
That would be brilliant, yeah. They're really keen on their 155s there as well, so I'd love to take that down. The real dream is to one day take the Duetto back to Milan. Our dad did take it once, possibly twice over the years before we were born, but that would be my dream to take it back down there.
Well, we'd take an article on that because we have one almost every issue.
Yeah,
Spider to Italy.
I was enjoying the last one actually. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's if I've known people. I don't think I've known anybody who's actually bought a Spider to do that. But I've known plenty of people who've said, have owned other Alphas and have said, I'd really like to buy a 105 Spider and drive it to Italy.
Yeah, it's the natural thing to do.
It's got to be done.
Yes,
brilliant. Thank you. That's been brilliant. Really enjoyed having you both on and look forward to seeing you maybe at National Alpha Day. Thanks very much.
See you there. Thank you.
That's all we have time for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time on Sunday, the 9th of April. Yes, that's right, the day of Rosie's wedding. I'm sure they'll stream it live to all the guests, but for everybody else, episode 77 will be available to download from 1:30 p.m. from Google Podcasts, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, the club's website, and everywhere else good podcasts are found. Until then, stay safe.